Alright, here it is. My first home video review in 2023. And what better way to talk about one of my, if not, favourite cartoons of all time, featuring your average family with a sense of humour, Family Guy. Actually, I'm kidding. What I meant to say was The Simpsons. Let's get on with it, shall we?
Yes!
Now, before we can get on with what I'm gonna talk about, let me clarify one thing for you all. I really love The Simpsons. I liked it when I was a kid, I loved it when I was a teenager, and I especially love it now as an adult. Everything from the massive cast of characters, the jokes that still hold up, the memorable quotes and catchphrases and whatnot. So, despite the fact that this cartoon is pretty much aimed towards adults, it caught the attention of my kiddie self as I was into cartoons like the Smurfs, Scooby-Doo, Will Quack Quack, anything from Disney and a bit of those French cartoons. And you bet I collected a tiny plethora of Simpsons merchandise, like toys, a lot of books, that Homer Simpson costume I used to have, a Seen It DVD that I didn't have until my 16th birthday in 2016, and best of all, home video releases. 4 of which I used to own. There's the DVDs such as Les Simpsons Le Film, which was a DVD of a French dub of a Simpsons movie that I first watched when it came out in cinemas in France, Around the World in 80 Does, which had episodes about the Simpson family going around different countries, and the complete 3rd season, which featured all episodes of season 3 that my brother got for Christmas in 2017. Although I didn't watch all of the episodes as I've watched several on the DVD, there was one scene that my brother would play over and over again, and that's this one.
My ding-a-ling, my ding-a-ling, I want you to play with my ding-a-ling.
This act is over.
Yeah, what else were you expecting as that became a meme? Just like some of the other aspects of the show. And not to mention, the only VHS of The Simpsons that I used to own, The Simpsons Greatest Hits. So, the history is kinda short. I was about 6 years old and my primary school had a jumble sale, where some of the kids in the classes give away their things they no longer want, like toys, books, videos and other things. I couldn't remember what things I got in the sale, but I remember that there was a VHS tape that caught my eye, and that was The Simpsons. I was already aware of that show. I asked my mum to buy it, which she did. So, in this VHS of today, it features milestone episodes or important things that have happened in The Simpsons. And as the cover of the tape states, it includes the most monumental episodes ever. And are they monumental as of today? Let's find out. So, we start off with the title of the tape that somehow came along with a warning scroll. I didn't know VHSs used to do that back then. After that, we cut to the bombastic sounding 20th Century Fox logo. I mean, how many times have I seen that logo show up in several movies and shows I've watched? Well, these tell me why. We then head on to our first promo of the tape, which is this.
The story of a boy, his sister, and his father.
Nerds! Bart Wars, The Simpsons Strike Back on video.
So, in case if you don't know, the VHS they're advertising has episodes of The Simpsons that reference Star Wars, but however, because the title is called Bart Wars, some of the episodes revolve around Bart and only one episode is centered around Star Wars, and the rest of the episodes don't feature anything or have references to that film series. And fun fact, I did indeed watch the VHS back in my secondary school. in 2016, as all I can remember is that the tape itself had no case and only the cassette, and it took about 5 years for me to watch that thing. And when I said the tape was Star Wars themed, they did go overboard with it.
Bart? You'll have to give up your Jedi mind control lessons. No, I won't. No, you won't.
Who was that supposed to be? But enough of that VHS. Let's move on to the next promo.
Welcome to Virtual Springfield, a 3D exploration of all things Simpsons. Drop by the Simpsons house.
How's the mowing going?
Drop dead, Flanders.
Mix a flaming mow.
Get out of here!
Shop at the Quickie Mart.
Discount jerky.
Or play games at Noiseland Arcade. Virtual Springfield will make Simpsons fans feel right at home.
Ah, Virtual Springfield. Too bad I didn't play it when it was around, cause it was a game for the Windows 95, and I only had a Windows XP back then. So if you also don't know, Virtual Springfield is a video game that was released back in 1997 where you explore Springfield in a 3D environment. As little of gameplay I've seen, it looks pretty neat. Anyway, on to the episodes. With our first episode, Simpsons roasting on an open fire, the very first episode of The Simpsons that aired way back in 1989. And it's funny, since the VHS tape was released back in 1999, about 10 years after the episode was aired, as if it were to celebrate the series or something. But before we can dive into the episode, there are intervals that tell us about the episodes and what significant content they've got, along with clips from episodes of The Simpsons that aren't in the tape, that have objects edited to have the fact replacing the text from the original, or they just show up on the television, like with this one here.
This episode, Simpsons Roasting on an Open Fire, first aired on December 17, 1989. It's the very first episode of The Simpsons.
That didn't explain anything.
So, because of copyright reasons, I'm going to use screen caps of the episodes from the website Frinkiac, because my video of the VHSs and DVDs of The Simpsons back in 2020 had been blocked worldwide by Fox because I used the theme song, and that I was forced to mute it and make it public, and that happened a year after I uploaded the video. So, I'm just gonna be doing it like the real Jims does them. So, in the episode, Simpsons Roasting on an Open Fire, the series premiere of the cartoon, it's Christmas time in Springfield and the Simpson family are preparing for the holidays. Marge has been keeping her Christmas savings in a big jar, but unfortunately has to use up all of the money when Bart gives himself a tattoo for her, and Marge has no other choice but to spend the Christmas savings to remove the tattoo. What's worse is that Mr. Burns, the owner of a Springfield nuclear power plant, announces that there will be no Christmas bonuses for any workers who have no skill, including Homer, and when Homer hears about the news, he is distraught. So, to gain more money for the Christmas holiday, Homer gets a job as Santa Claus, but immediately gets revealed by his son Bart. Unsuccessful with his job, Homer and Bart are brought by Barney to a dog race at the Springfield Downs to place a bet on a dog who will win the race, which was Santa's little helper. Unfortunately, the dog came last and their hopes at getting money is lost. That was until Santa's little helper's owner sent him away and Homer decides to take him home. Despite him not getting his Christmas bonus, the family is delighted about the dog, and that shows that Homer indeed has given them the best Christmas gift of all. Okay, so right off the bat, the first episode on the tape is centered around Christmas, and in the previous episode, the DVD I've talked about has also an episode that takes place during Christmas, whilst the rest of the episodes aren't Christmas themed like the first, much like this VHS. Call back. So, what do I think of this episode? Well, for starters, this is the premiere episode of Season 1, where most things were very different than later seasons, like the voices, the colours, the personalities and such. While certain characters have voices who still play as them to this very day, there was one character whose voice sounded really different than he was in later seasons, and that was Mr. Burns. So originally, Mr. Burns was voiced by Christopher Collins, a voice actor who, in my curiosity while researching him, also did voices for characters in other cartoons during the 80s, such as Starscream from Transformers and Cobra Commander from G.I. Joe. He sadly passed away in 1994, 4 years after he left the show, where he was replaced by Harry Shearer, who continues to voice Mr. Burns to this day. And who could forget that this episode had a lot of goofs here and there? Granted, this is during the earlier seasons of The Simpsons, as most of the characters were crudely drawn, but there are a ton of mistakes to be seen, ranging from colouring errors, continuity errors, and misaligned objects. That was what Season 1 had things in common. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. This episode had at the very least showcased some very decent jokes that were ahead of its time, and something about Lisa's character felt different, as although she was developing some intelligence in this season, she was also on the same mischievous side with Bart, when they both poked fun at singing Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. So, despite the minor issues, it's a rather nice way to start off the series, even if the cartoon has been around on the air for decades with about 34 seasons, never alluding to end eventually. The next episode on the VHS is Sweet Seymour Skinner's Badass Song, an episode from Season 5, which according to The Interval...
This next episode, Sweet Seymour Skinner's Badass Song, marks the milestone 100th episode of The Simpsons.
Yay!
Well said. With about 100 episodes in, how about we go in with an episode about the principal of a Springfield elementary school, Seymour Skinner. In this episode, Bart brings his dog, Santa's Little Helper, to school for show and tell day. The dog has been taking interest by the students, but while Bart is told to lock him up, Santa's Little Helper goes all the way to the air vents in the school. Just as Principal Skinner and Groundskeeper Willie do what they can to get the dog out, Superintendent Chalmers, making his second appearance in the series, arrives at the school and was about to forgive Skinner, but fires him after Willie had fallen on the superintendent, much to Bart's guilt. With the principal axed off, it is Ned Flanders who becomes the elementary school's principal, as he didn't follow the rules, letting the children act wild and cause absolute mayhem. Meanwhile, we see what Skinner does in his spare time outside of the school, rejoining the army and showing a friendly relationship with Bart. Seeing how much of a troublemaker he is, Bart shows some concern for the principal. This is one of a few episodes where we see Skinner and his life in the army, which most of the episodes establish that. And it's not unusual that we see Ned Flanders becoming the school principal for once, and yet the only thing he does is let the students do whatever they want, instead of teaching them and keeping them put, and that led to him being fired, still in good spirits anyway. And no, we did not see him interact with Edna Krabappel and see anything that predated Edna in that one episode of Season 22. He's just laying off his work, apathetic about what's going on. And before you could say anything, no, I'm not bothered to bring up the steamed hams meme into this review, because to me, it seems like they're still making videos about that one scene to this day. So anyway, a rather good milestone episode about Skinner and his life whenever he isn't at the school, and after 100 episodes, this was the way to celebrate it. And this episode also had this line, which became a meme. The next episode on the tape is Trash of the Titans, an episode from Season 9.
Trash of the Titans marks The Simpsons' 200th episode. The Simpsons is the longest-running primetime animated show in television history, a Guinness World Record.
Oh, you'd believe that's true years later when they'll hear this. In the 200th episode, a new holiday has been invented called Love Day, a holiday that's inspired by Valentine's. When the Simpsons are done celebrating, they take out the leftovers and decorations in the trash bin, just as when Homer and Bart make it even fuller, causing them to not take it out. When Homer is about to take the trash out, the garbage men ignore him, which made Homer insult the two men, ending the conflict with Homer covered in garbage and cutting off their service. With garbage piling around the Simpsons' house, complaints from the neighbors were spoken until one day the pile had been cleared away, much to Homer's joy and disappointment to hear that Marge had written an apology letter to the sanitation commissioner, Ray Patterson. Homer then rallies the town of Springfield to vote for him to invest a round-the-clock trash pickup service as well as an emergency cleanup service, which causes a kerfuffle with Ray. In the end, Homer wins the election and establishes the garbage service again, with a musical number that's a reference to the Candyman song from the 1971 film Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. And I must say, this is one of the songs from The Simpsons that stuck to me ever since I was a child. Whilst there were some other greats like See My Vest, We Do, Baby on Board, Who Needs the Quickie Mart and plenty of others, this one was what me and my sister can remember back in the day. This episode is also notorious for being one of the episodes being ridiculously censored on Channel 4, where if you don't know, some lines had to be cut as they sounded rather offensive, and for one shot of Krusty throwing away this box which says, "You get the idea." And this applies to the other episodes, as the channel doesn't want any content that's either offensive or just plain out unsuitable for people who watch Channel 4. And who could forget that it also had you two as guest stars? Yep, they're in it and I'm not even a fan of them. Of course, there's the ending where the Simpsons and the Springfieldians move out of Springfield after the town had become flooded with garbage and they were forced to leave. Until the next episode, they're seen back in Springfield with the garbage completely gone, with no mention of it whatsoever because who cares, it's episodic. A decent milestone episode, not that much important. The next episode on the tape is Bart Gets an F, the Season 2 premiere.
This next episode, Bart Gets an F, is the highest rated episode of The Simpsons to date.
Is it though? I'd like to think that Homer's Enemy, the episode with Frank Grimes in it, surpassed, so it seems like this episode was the highest rated back in 1999, and that episode hadn't reached the same expectations as Homer's Enemy. In this episode, Bart has been told by his teacher, Mrs. Krabappel, that his grades are slipping, as he never gets his work any better. So, he tries to do his homework, but gets distracted by most things, and when he does, he falls asleep. Next morning, he becomes anxious about failing the test and avoids this by faking his sickness so he can carry on with his homework, to which he failed. Upon being interviewed by the school counselor, Bart promises to his parents that he will do better and that he doesn't want to be held back. By getting some help from Martin, Bart also teaches Martin to have a bad attitude like him, to which he takes too far. He then prays to God to miss school just so he can study more with his work, and the next day it had snowed. Unfortunately for Bart, he has to study as that was what he wished for. When he does study, he tries to get a grip of himself but gets distracted by the snow. When he shows his test to Mrs. Krabappel, she gives it an F, showing that Bart hadn't been concentrating. This made Bart go into a breakdown about how he messed up, but at the same time, he understood that George Washington surrendered Ford's necessity to the French in 1754. To the shock of Mrs. Krabappel, she corrected Bart's work, hearing that he has indeed doing some research and gives Bart's work a D-. Much to Bart's joy, he becomes excited that he kissed the teacher and telling everyone about it, to which he realized about the first thing he did. So, the reason why this episode was the highest rated episode back then was because it was praised for representing kids who have problems while studying with their work, and I wholeheartedly agree. This episode is also notable for the first episode to use the second version of the Simpsons intro that has been used all the way up to the season 20 episode Lisa the Drama Queen. So it's rather uncommon for me to talk about the opening for The Simpsons, as I pretty much know the differences from the one in the previous season, which I was unaware when I was a child. But enough about that. This episode clearly demonstrates about Bart and how he struggles with his schoolwork, and from what I've seen, there's this video by Made to Express that talks about how The Simpsons deals with the school system, so be free to watch it if you like. The last episode on the tape is Lisa's First Word, an episode from season 4.
In Lisa's first word, it is actually baby Maggie who speaks for the first time. Elizabeth Taylor is the guest voice of Maggie.
Wow, thanks for spoiling the episode, Interval. We haven't heard what Maggie said, and you're explaining that she was voiced by a guest star. In this episode, the family tried to make Maggie speak, with no success. Marge tells the story about how Lisa was born and what her first word was. In spring of 1983, Homer, Marge, and their one-year-old son Bart... Okay, just a reminder, I found out that Bart was first born in 1979, but this episode contradicts that Bart was about 1 year old when he was with his parents in 1983, so did no one in the writing team notice this? He used to live in an apartment complex on the Lower East Side of Springfield. Marge announces to Homer that she is expecting another baby, leading Bart to imagine to use his baby brother as a scapegoat. With another family member on the way, the family decide to move to a new house to make room for the baby. And this is where we get to see how the family got their home, which they still reside to this day. In the following year, 1984, The Simpsons move into their new home, 742 Evergreen Terrace. Bart is introduced to Krusty the Clown for the first time, and later on, he was forced to give up his crib for the new baby, and that Homer had built a bed shaped like a clown, which traumatized Bart so badly.
Can't sleep. Clown will eat me. Can't sleep. Clown will eat me.
When Homer takes Marge to the hospital to have the baby delivered, Bart stays at the Flanders' house, and just as the baby girl was born, they name her Lisa. Bart is introduced to Lisa and shows a distaste to her, becoming jealous of her. Many attempts were made to get rid of Lisa until Bart gives up and decides to run away, having enough of Lisa ruining his life, until Lisa says her very first word when she calls out Bart's name. This made a change of heart to Bart and tells Homer and Marge about her first word, especially Lisa saying David Hasselhoff. So in the end, Homer tucks Maggie into bed, hoping that she may never say a word, but unaware to him...
Daddy.
It clearly shows. This has got to be one of the sweetest episodes in The Simpsons, period. It's up there with And Maggie Makes Three, and it's said to be a 4-parter of those flashback episodes, but that's just my speculation. So, despite me stating the error that this episode takes place in both 1983 and 84, and that Bart was supposed to be 4 and 5, it showed some inspirations from the real world. Like the Krusty Burger doing a promotion for the 1984 Summer Olympic Games, which is obviously what McDonald's did for the 1984 Olympics, and I'll say, I think I'm learning something new there. So in conclusion, a very heartwarming episode, especially one for an animated sitcom. So that wraps up the episodes on the tape, and were they monumental as the cover said? In my theory, they were, but some of them weren't quite grand as most episodes are. The first one was where it all began, the second was the show's 100th episode, the third was the 200th, the fourth was the highest rated, and the last one had Maggie speaking for the first time. So while it's nice they included some great episodes on the tape, I feel like they should have included more episodes during The Simpsons' golden years, like Marge vs. the Monorail, Deep Space Homer, Treehouse of Horror 5, Last Exit to Springfield, and many others I could go on about. But it's for the better that they chose these episodes, as they were known for being important, and that's true. And to end off this review, I may have to pick up a quote from an episode to wrap things up, as there are so many of them, so I'll just pick a random one. Like...
Talking on a turn, that's a paddling. Looking out the window, that's a paddling. Staring at my handles, that's a paddling. Paddling the school canoe, oh, you better believe that's a paddling.
So, in my next review, I'll be going back to a childhood favourite of mine, which I've talked about in the first episode, and this time, it's the very first time of me seeing him on DVD. So until then, see you there!
Thank you.